Our first witnesses this morning are Sue and Tara.
That's correct, sir.
Sue and Tara, please.
Please state your full name.
So, Tara Deanne Allen.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please state your full name.
Susan Delglyn.
Please take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Sue, you're here to talk about your late husband, Mick, and Tara, your late father. There is a photograph of Mick that we're going to have on the screen as much as possible during your evidence. It will appear shortly, I'm sure. We've had a few glitches with documents this morning, but the photograph will be up in a moment. Mick had severe haemophilia A. Sue, Mick talked to you about what it was like being a haemophiliac as a child. What can you tell us about that?
Well, he was diagnosed when he was about 18 months old, so in the mid-1940s, and not a lot was known about haemophilia then. It actually happened, he fell and had a small stone embedded in his forehead, and when they removed it, it bled profusely. He was taken to the hospital, and after tests and things were done, his parents were told at the time, it was referred to, he was known as a bleeder. His parents had never heard of anything like it, and haemophilia was then explained to them, and it was the first case in their family that had ever been known. So after that, they had to be very careful with him. When he got to school age, I don't think he started school till he was about 6. He went to school, they made him wear a padded suit, a leather suit to school, and he was stood up in front of the class, and the other children were told that they mustn't hit him or hurt him. And he said it was, obviously he was the butt of jokes, and he was very uncomfortable through the summer months in this leather suit, which made him very hot. And his life was quite unhappy at that time. And the only solutions at that time when he had bleeds, unless it was something very minor, he would have to go into hospital and have blood transfusions, as this was at the time the only solution for a bleed. So he spent a lot of his early years in hospital and didn't lead what he classed as a normal childhood.
You met Mick in 1971.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about what he was like?
He was the life and soul of the party. He was always really happy, and he had a wonderful sense of humour, which was what attracted me to him, and I think his friends to him. He joked about everything, and he always saw the very positive and bright side of life. And we got married 11 months after we met, and it was really good. Our whole life was sort of fun, and his sense of humour was what won through the dark times.
Mick was treated at the Oxford Haemophilia Centre.
Yes.
Early on he was treated with plasma, then he went on to cryoprecipitate, then he was moved on to factor 8.
Yes.
As far as you were aware, was Mick provided with any information or advice about whether he should change to factor 8?
No, I think it was just seen at the time that it was such a good option compared to the pain and of the bleeds to just be able to have an injection that most of the time solved the problem. I don't think he was fully aware of the risks, although he did know that a lot of the blood supplies came from America, where they were taken from drug addicts and alcoholics, etc. But I don't think he ever fully appreciated the full impact that could possibly have, or if that was ever explained to him.
When you got Mick's medical records, you felt that it was like someone had thrown them up in the air and only caught some of them.
Yes, they were very incomplete and not in any kind of order.
When you looked through them, you discovered he'd been tested for hepatitis B since the 1970s. Was Mick aware that he was being tested for it, as far as you're aware?
I'm not totally sure of that. If he had hepatitis B, he never showed any symptoms all through the 70s and 80s. His only problems were those related to haemophilia.
And as far as you're aware, although he tested positive for the Australian antibody in 1972 and the hepatitis B antibody in 1975, as far as you're aware, he was never told that.
Not that I can remember. As I said, if he was told, the fact that he remained sort of in his general health very healthy, I don't think he ever saw it as a problem anyway.
Could we have document 1183007, please, Paul? Thank you. It's a pathology report from May 1985, which indicates that on that date, Mick had tested positive for HTLV3, what we now call HIV, in May 85. And can we then look at 1183014, please? I'm afraid that's not the right reference. Could it? It 1183014. Thank you. And if we look across the line, which is HTLV3, we can see that there is an entry that's been inserted in handwriting on the 7th of March 1985, HIV positive, and then it seems to say 1/40, and then the 3rd of April 85 minus and plus, perhaps an equivocal result, and then 2nd of May 1985. But when you went through Mick's records, you've not been able to find any notes, any pathology reports or anything dealing with the 7th of March or the 3rd of April 1985.
No.
We can see the 2nd of May 85, which we've just looked at. Then there's a series of results thereafter on this page, and again, in his medical records, you've been unable to track any pathology reports or any notes relating to those other entries in 85 and 86.
That's right.
So if we then look at 1183005, we have a letter dated as postmark in which Dr. Ritzer was asking Mick, we want to make sure that all patients who wish to know the results of their HTLV3 antibody testing have been given the results. In order to bring our records up to date, would you please fill in the enclosed form and return it to us in the stamped addressed envelope? We apologise for troubling you again. And then if we go to 1183006, which is the form, we can see that Mick has signed it on the 25th of March 1986. In the medical records, there's nothing that predates March 86 indicating that Mick was told about his HTLV3 status before that date. Is that right?
No, I'd actually thought it was later than 86, but obviously it wasn't, but it's hard to remember exact dates.
And in Mick's medical records, this appears to be the day, you've correlated it with another record in his medical records, this appears to be the day he was told his results for the first time.
Yes.
So having tested positive, certainly by the 3rd of May 85, it wasn't until May 86 that he was told.
Yes.
As you say, your recollection was that Mick wasn't told until 1988, but when you've looked at the records, that doesn't seem to be quite right.
No.
After all this time.
That's right.
In terms of when it was discussed with you about Mick's HIV status by the clinicians, could we have document 1183009, please? It's a record from the 26th of January 1987. Thank you. At home to see wife, no pain today, thinks he has gallstones, discussed HIV with wife, condoms and pessaries given, blood taken from Susan for HIV. And that appears to be the first time that you were spoken to directly about the HIV. And it's your recollection that was the first time any advice was given to both of you about the HIV.
I think before I was spoken to, but only very shortly before, he was just told that we were not to have unprotected sex and we were not to touch any of his used needles, and it was just said that if he cut himself, we had to be careful, but no real indication as to what being careful entailed.
What was your and Mick's reaction to being told of this diagnosis?
Well, it was like a huge black cloud over us, and what do you think? It's sort of like the death sentence being passed. Not a lot was really known about HIV at that time, certainly not by ourselves anyway, and we sort of assumed, I think, that HIV always turned into full-blown AIDS. He was put on the AZT treatment, and we were told that potentially the first signs, if it was to change into AIDS, would be things like chest infections and pneumonia, and his immune system would become weakened. But in actual fact, his general health stayed really quite good. And so I think we got a little bit complacent after, as the months went past, we began to think, well, maybe he was going to be okay and that the AZT was working. And we sort of carried on life as normal in that sort of immediate time after the initial shock. He then had a brain hemorrhage in...
Let's come to that in a moment. We'll just stay around the time of Mick's diagnosis. Paul, could we have the photograph back up as well, please? When you received the diagnosis, you agreed that you wouldn't tell the children about it.
Yes.
Why was that?
Because of their age and the stigma around the whole HIV and AIDS thing at the time, it was quite a burden, really, to live with. And I thought that they were too young and they didn't need to know. And for me, I thought that they never needed to know unless he became ill. And then we would have to explain to them. But I didn't think that they needed to have that extra burden. They already knew that their dad had haemophilia. I didn't want them to have to carry the burden of them knowing that he was HIV positive as well.
But you said in your statement, Mick wasn't very good at keeping secrets.
He wasn't, no, and he'd wanted to tell them straight away, and I begged him not to. I think it was about a year or so after, when I wasn't actually at home, that he did tell them. And I was really cross about it because I thought that just put an extra burden on them.
Tara, what do you remember about your dad telling you he had HIV?
I remember it very well. I think I was about 12 or 13. It was a Saturday night. Myself and my brother were sat watching TV with him, so it was a normal night. And he just blurted out, "I have AIDS." I got up and ran out of the room. When I eventually went back in and sat down, he said that he had AIDS and that we couldn't tell anybody because people thought that you could catch it from drinking from the same cup, and that if we told people, we wouldn't have any friends and nobody would want to speak to us. He also told us at that point that he didn't want us to tell anybody about his haemophilia anymore because the two would be associated. So that at that point, life became very difficult because not only did I have to deal with the fact that he was terminally ill, I couldn't tell anybody. And he had joint replacements and things as well and walked with a limp. So it then, when people asked, "What's wrong with your dad?" it just became very difficult because I could no longer mention haemophilia.
You've said in your statement that as a young girl entering your teenage years, you became very frightened and confused.
Yeah. It was a difficult time. It was hard having to just behave normally as well. The fact that I couldn't say anything to friends, or it was very difficult.
So, did you feel able to tell close family?
No, we didn't tell anybody at all. None of my family knew. I think Mick told one of his sisters and eventually his father, but we didn't tell anyone. And again, we stopped mentioning haemophilia because there was that association. So we just kept it to ourselves and carried on.
You said a moment ago that Mick's health held up well until
His general health, yes.
until about 1990. And then in 1990 he developed esophageal varices.
Yes.
At that time, were you aware that Mick had hepatitis C?
No.
Could we have 1614004, please, Paul? It's a pathology report that appears to be from the 7th of June 1990, requesting a viral screen for Hep A, B, C. And then if we look in the bottom right corner, there's the note Hep C dash positive in past. But as far as you're aware, Mick wasn't told about this at that time?
No.
And we can see that from 1614005. He'd been admitted to the hospital on the 6th of June and discharged on the 8th of June. And at this stage in the letter to Mick's GP, we can see diagnosis, chronic liver disease, cause uncertain. So again, 1990, as far as you're aware, Mick didn't know he had hepatitis C. And if we then go to 1183011, please. And we look across the line, HCV antibody, there's no note through to the end of the line, which runs till September 91. No note of a HCV antibody test, either positive or negative. And then 1183012, which is a continuation of this table. We see the first time that there's a positive in the HCV RNA line is in May 1992. as far as you are aware, Mick was not told that he had hepatitis C until 6 to 8 months before he died.
That's right, yes.
And we'll come back to the circumstances of that in a moment. Having obtained Mick's medical records, you found a number of records suggesting that Mick had been drinking heavily.
That's right, yes.
We're just going to look at one of them, at 1183003, please. It's from February 1990, which indicates that the doctor was introduced briefly to Mick on one of his visits to the centre. He's been found to have abnormal liver function tests and certainly has signs of chronic liver disease with spider nevi and a palpable spleen. His AST and gamma GT have both been found persistently to be elevated. On this occasion, I limited the contact to merely discussing with him the various factors which might be involved in his chronic liver problems. He's never been jaundiced and has been on home treatment with factor 8 for 10 years, and he has a regular alcohol consumption, which initially he merely indicated as 4 pints of beer and half a bottle of wine a week. Can I stop there? Is that accurate?
No, not at all.
It's completely untrue.
I've never even known him drink beer. I don't think he even liked it.
But it then became apparent that he had actually been given 6 bottles of spirits at Christmas. All of these are now empty.
No, again, this was a complete shock. This was almost as shock when we read this as learning that he was HIV positive, because this was the first time I'd ever seen or heard of anything like that. From 1981 onwards, Michael and I had ran our own business together. We ran an electronic business from home, so we were together virtually all the time. We didn't really have much of a social life because we didn't have babysitters and the children were quite young. So there was no when that he could have been drinking to any extent without our knowledge. And also, after his knee operation in, I think it was 1981, his walking was quite difficult. He couldn't walk far. So he relied totally on a car for everything, for delivering work, for his hobby of fishing, for us going out as a family, and he would never have jeopardised his driving licence by drinking. In all the years that we were together, I never ever saw him worse the way of a drink. It wasn't something that we did. We didn't drink at home and we didn't go out drinking socially, only on very rare occasions. So I was horrified to read that this had been written about him.
And I'd just like to add to that, I never saw either of my parents drink as a child. It didn't happen.
We've had a response from Dr. Trowell, who was provided with your statements, and her full statement will be published in due course. What she says in her statement in relation to the record of alcohol is this: my normal practice when seeing any patient with abnormal liver function was to take a full medical and personal history, and as alcohol can cause liver disease, I would routinely ask a patient what alcohol they drank. I would have recorded this in their clinical notes and also in my letter to their general practitioner. I would have recorded these details in their notes at the time that I saw the patient and dictated the letter to their general practitioner shortly after the consultation. I would record what alcohol the patient told me they drank and also refer to any relevant reports of their alcohol consumption made by nurses and other staff and family members who'd been involved in the patient's care. I would not have had any reason to record any other alcohol consumption and would never have considered fabricating this, as doing so would not have contributed positively to the patient's care or their survival. She then says, I'm sorry that for Mr. Cox the outcome was not more positive, and that after this period of time this questioning and my letters have caused distress to his family. Another point that you found in Mick's records is 1183010. Where there is an appointment on the 8th of July 1991, and towards the end of that entry there is a note, blood taken for Douglas Nixon research. were you aware of Mick being involved in any research projects?
Not at all, no.
And this was the first time you saw any reference to bloods being taken for research?
Yes.
Going back to 1990, Mick had laser treatment for the varices,
That's right, yes.
but then in September 1991 he had a brain hemorrhage.
Yes.
You've said in your statement it had devastating results on Mick's vision and his cognitive function.
Yes, it changed him completely. He recovered as such from the actual brain hemorrhage, but he changed completely in his personality. He'd always been really cheerful, positive and a joker, and he became very withdrawn and progressively depressed, and it put a huge strain on us. He also was a trained electronic wireman, and when he felt well enough to start work, he found that he could no longer understand a wiring diagram. He said, "I just can't remember, I've forgotten it all." And the strain it put on us really was that because his personality had changed so much, as he would sit there talking, I would look at him and he looked the same and he sounded the same, but I didn't know him anymore.
That's when things in the family changed, really. I then became my father's main source of support, really. My relationship with my mum became strained as a result. And no, it was a really difficult time.
I felt that I could no longer communicate with him in the same way. I never knew what his response to anything I said would be. It was like treading on eggshells to try and hold a conversation because he was very negative, and I felt that I was sort of quite obviously really I suppose, but I became the sort of the sounding block for the anger that was in him. And it put a huge strain on all of us. The atmosphere in the home changed from always being happy-go-lucky to being very tense. To me, that was when I actually lost him as a person.
Tara, in your statement, you've said your dad was frightened
Yeah.
and often very upset.
Yeah, and we'd sit up until early hours of the morning because he was too scared to go to sleep in case he didn't wake up. He had no support, there was no counselling or anything for him, so I became that support at the time. So I guess I had to take on an adult's role at a very young age.
And at the same time, the business folded.
Yes.
Something that had been incredibly successful.
Yes, we had to, because I wasn't actually trained in electronics, how it worked was he would do a sample and I would copy samples and he would check my work. But because he could no longer function in that way, we had to stop our electronic business, and I went back to work for Tesco's, who I'd worked for after I left school. And that was how we sort of managed, really.
You were working night shifts.
Yes.
In order to make ends meet,
Yes.
but also continue to support the children
Yes.
during the day. At that time, you also received some money from the McFarlane Trust.
That's right, yes. They gave us some towards our mortgage, and he also received some disability benefit. I can't remember the exact figures.
What was the process like trying to obtain that money?
I don't think it was too bad, but I don't really remember. I have to be honest.
About 6 to 8 months before Mick died, he became very unwell.
Yes.
He was bloated, jaundiced, and constantly cold?
Initially, he wasn't jaundiced. The first signs were the bloating and nausea and problems with bowel movements. And we thought that this was possibly the start of the HIV becoming AIDS, because we knew nothing about the hepatitis. And he went to the hospital and they tested him, and when he, I don't remember if it was the same day, but when he came back he said that he had hepatitis C. At the time, I was unaware of how infectious and how chronic his condition was, and that was almost like a relief, because I thought, oh, that's good, it's not turning into AIDS, it's only hepatitis. But I didn't realise the full impact or how advanced his liver condition was.
Could we have document 1183013, please, Paul? This is a note when Mick was visited at home in May 1993, and we can see that appears to be quite cheerful and stoical, but waiting to hear about whether a liver transplant is viable. Over all of these years to this point, had Mick ever been offered any treatment for hepatitis C?
No, because we didn't know he had it.
And had Mick ever, as far as you were concerned, been offered or had a discussion around a liver transplant?
Not that I can remember, no. I'm sure that he would have jumped at the chance had he known that that was even viable.
Tara, you have some particular concerns about the treatment of your father at this point.
Yeah, my concern is that the false entries of alcoholism resulted in him not being offered treatment or the option of a transplant. And I think that that's what's happened there.
You're concerned that had those records not included references to heavy drinking, that your dad would have received hepatitis C treatment and he would potentially have been offered a liver transplant and more monitoring to find it.
I think the false entries resulted in him not getting the treatment that he should have had.
Mick also suffered bouts of encephalopathy.
Yes, after he was diagnosed, well, after we were told that he had hepatitis C, his health deteriorated very quickly. He would become encephalopathic. He would do things like try and change the TV with the telephone. He wouldn't, his cognitive functioning was not good. He would have to go and have albumin injections. He was constantly cold, even as the weather got warm. We would have to wrap him up with blankets and keep the heating on. He was only allowed to drink 1.2 litres of fluid a day, any fluid, which is very restrictive. He very rarely could keep much food down. He often didn't make it to the toilet. He looked very ill indeed.
Mentally, you've said that Mick knew he was dying but wasn't ready to die.
No, he didn't want to. Tara was having a baby at the time and he was desperate to hang on and see his first grandchild. But unfortunately he died weeks before she was born.
Mick went into hospital on a Thursday.
Yes.
And on the Monday you received a call to get to the hospital straight away.
Yes. That particular day, I'd lent Mick's car to his brother because he was going to see him that night. Although I had a feeling that he wouldn't be coming out of hospital, it did happen. He passed quicker than I thought. And so I wasn't going to go up until the following day. But I had the phone call. As I said, I only had one car there, and I went to start the car and the battery was flat. So a neighbour kindly took me to get a new battery, and while that battery was being fitted, I had another phone call to say I was too late. This has always been a great source of guilt to me because I'd always promised Mick that I would be there with him when the time came, and I wasn't. And never been able to forgive myself for not being there when he most needed me.
Mick died on the 7th of June 1993, aged 48. His death certificate gives his cause of death as 1A liver failure, 1B hepatitis C, chronic liver failure, 1C haemophilia. After Mick died, did you, Susan, or your children receive any counselling or psychological support?
Nothing at all, no.
Can you tell us something of the impact of Mick's death on you?
Well, initially I was just relieved for him that his suffering was over because the last 6 months for him have been horrendous. It was a slow, undignified and horrible death. But obviously, you know, we'd lost a loving husband and a good father, and it changed all of our lives. It just changed everything. And I always felt there was a great injustice that he was taken so early in life.
You also have a son, Shane.
Yes.
And he's provided a statement to the inquiry as well. But can you tell us a little of the impact on him?
Well, initially, he's said since in more recent, the last couple of years, since all of this has all sort of been brought back into the public eye again, that it never hit him at the time that his father had actually passed away, because the last sort of 18 months or so he'd spent quite a lot of time in hospital. It was only the following year, in 1994, when I took him on holiday, and it was just us two, that it actually hit him that he'd gone and that he wasn't there with us on holiday. And he said that was the first time it really impacted on him, that he wasn't coming back. He has had a drug problem for 20 years or so. Obviously, we can't say that that's a result of Mick's death, but I'm sure it hasn't helped. Recently, he's had some quite serious mental health problems himself, and he's been receiving help from the mental health group and the doctor.
Tara, can you tell us something of the impact on you?
In the early days, it was very difficult because we still felt we had to keep it a secret. I always remember the day after my dad died, a friend phoned me just to chat, and I remember sitting on the floor at home talking to her on the phone, and I didn't tell her that my dad had died the day before because I knew she'd ask why, and his health was still a secret that we had to keep. The last year or two has been very difficult, because I think that's when I've actually sort of gone back in time a bit and re-looked at things, and I suppose dealt with it openly because I've been able to. But no, the impact's been huge.
You've said in your statement you've had anxiety issues and an eating disorder over the years.
Yeah, I had. I started with eating disorder about the age of 13. It was my way. It's a form of control, really. Life was out of control, and it was the one thing I think that I could control. So I used it as a tool, and I did for years.
And even now, you continue to have nightmares and very difficult days.
I had a nightmare last night. Yeah. It has been difficult. Yeah, going over it all and getting the medical records and them being so incomplete. The false entries of alcoholism. It's been really tough.
You gave birth to your daughter just weeks after your dad died,
Yeah.
and you were given a private room with an ensuite bathroom.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
At the time, I think that we assumed I'd been granted that privilege because of my young age. I was only 16. In hindsight, looking back on it, it's some of it felt uncomfortable. I was given, as you said, the private bathroom adjoined to my room, and I was instructed that that was the bathroom I must use, and I wasn't to use any of the communal facilities, the toilets, bathroom. And that was made very clear at the time. I also remember them doing some tests. I can't remember a huge amount about it. I do remember them mentioning MRSA. I do also remember them mentioning hepatitis C, and I remember that my father's name was mentioned.
In retrospect, you said in your statement you wonder whether you were given the private room, separate bathroom,
Because they wondered if I was infectious to other patients and staff. Yeah, absolutely. Now that's what I think was probably the case.
You've said in your statement that the memory of your father's trauma has never left you.
No.
You no longer trust doctors.
No, I don't at all.
And when your son was young, that impacted on his treatment as well. Can you tell us about that?
Well, my son was also a severe haemophiliac, and we had to attend the same haemophilia centre with him. So yeah, I was very concerned, and there was that distrust there.
You've told us in your statement about a particular occasion when you were told that the centre was running low on recombinant treatment.
Yeah, I did take some comfort when my son was born that he would be having a man-made product rather than plasma. When he was about 3 years old, there was a shortage of the man-made product for whatever reason, and they wanted to give him plasma. I remember having a complete breakdown in the haemophilia centre, in floods of tears, telling them that there was no way they were giving my son plasma. I believe at the time it was agreed at the time that I could have a small supply to use for on-demand bleeds, but he couldn't have his usual prophylactic treatment because there wasn't a supply. So I took the small supply for on-demand bleeds of recombinant factor, and I held him back from nursery until the supply issue was sorted.
And you said that at the time the doctor tried to reassure you that the plasma was heat-treated and safe.
Yes, he did, and I do remember shouting back at him, "That's what you told my dad," and it wasn't.
But that's been an added worry for you in dealing with your...
Yeah, certainly in the early years, yeah. And it's always been a concern, but in the early years, it was just the revisiting of it, and no, it was very difficult.
Those are the questions I have for you. I'm just going to turn to Mr. Snowden, who, as you know, represents you, to see if there's anything else he would like me to raise. And I understand that you both have something you'd like to say at the end.
Yeah. Oh, do you want that first? My father, Michael James Cox, a haemophiliac, was killed by infected factor VIII blood products on the 7th of June 1993. I believe false entries of alcoholism were made in his medical records in an attempt to try and cover up the truth. Factor VIII blood products should never have been licensed in this country until they were found to be safe. Instead, warnings were ignored and lives were destroyed. The government and pharmaceutical companies were responsible for importing, manufacturing and distributing the infected factor VIII blood products, and they should admit liability now.
Sue, I think you had something you also wanted to say.
To have lost a wonderful husband and father from infected blood products was devastating, but we thought that we were just unfortunate. But to have learned 25 years later that the potentially fatal effects of using infected blood had long been documented, and that false entries in his medical records of alcohol abuse had been responsible for his demise from hepatitis C, makes a mockery of the Hippocratic oath and the trust that we are supposed to put in the medical profession. This has brought fresh pain and distress and an added sense of injustice to our family, and is not only an insult to Michael's memory, but a complete betrayal of the faith that he had in the doctors who were meant to care for him.
Sue, Tara, you said, I think it was you, Sue, who said it, that we kept it to ourselves and carried on. That obviously makes it difficult to open up. And Tara, you've spoken about how, although you have opened up over the last short while, it still brings you nightmares.
I began telling people sort of many years ago. This is the first time we've ever spoken publicly.
Well, I thought it must
about
be,
it.
and plainly it's been, particularly for you, Sue, at times painful to describe the loss of the man that you knew. It is incredibly difficult to come here and lay your emotions bare, but it is important for us, and I can only admire your courage and thank you for your evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a break until 25 past 11. 25 past.